So we are still a few days away from the release of Super Mario 3D All-Stars on the Nintendo Switch, but the game has already leaked onto the internet. Now, I think this has occurred because some retailers have been selling it early, and I've seen some pictures online of people posting it in hand. Naturally, with someone that has a modified Nintendo Switch and a copy of the game early is most likely going to dump the game and upload it onto the internet, and that's exactly what has happened this morning. Now, keep in mind that this is all secondhand information, but I do want to talk about some things that are going on with this game. And Twitter user Oatmeal Dome, who is a known data miner on the Nintendo Switch and a trusted source with this information, he's done things like this in the past and gives us information about what's going on with up-and-coming Switch games that you may be interested in from a technical aspect, has posted a series of tweets going over Mario 3D All-Stars in some detail, and I think a lot of it is quite interesting, and some of them I have mixed opinions about. So let's jump into it. The first thing that I want to say is that Super Mario 3D All-Stars, all three games are running emulation. Oatmeal Dome goes on to say that Galaxy and Sunshine is running a Wii and GameCube emulator known as Haji, possibly made by Nerd, which is Nintendo of Europe division, and Mario 64 is running a Nintendo 64 emulator, which most likely is a custom-made emulator that's been internally done by Nerd themselves. Now, many people believe that Mario 64 was actually a port because of the changes in textures and the upresing to 720p. But look, the reality is Nintendo 64 emulation has been doing this for a long time. The upresing to 720p is something that an original Xbox can manage with its Nintendo 64 emulator, and stuff like that's been being done since like 2003. So I always suspected emulation was being used, especially because there was no 16:9 widescreen and there was no 60 frames per second on that particular port. Now, Oatmeal Dome goes on to discuss the N64 emulation in some more detail. It's a custom-built one, which at the time doesn't appear to use any code from the public domain. The new textures and texture packs are applied on the fly using LUA. Now, LUA is a high-level programming language that's portable, and it's a good candidate for the task. So essentially what's happening here, guys, is that anytime you see a new asset or something different that you don't expect or you haven't seen before, essentially it's being replaced on the fly. And ultimately what LUA is doing is just, basically waiting for a particular memory address to be hit, and then it's replacing it with its own patched call, which replaces the texture or replaces the piece of code. But the idea of on-the-fly patching like this is kind of intriguing to me, and based on what we've seen so far, I don't have the game yet in hand, it does seem to work quite well. But look, let's be honest, at the end of the day, there are homebrew versions of Super Mario 64 out there on Switch that run at 1080p at 60 frames per second with widescreen, and many of us expect at least to be at the level of that. But I'll get into my opinions and thoughts at the end of this episode. Let's move on to Super Mario Sunshine. Now, this too is also running a custom GameCube emulator known as Haji, built internally and running the Vulkan API. Now, Vulkan is interesting because on the Nintendo Switch, you essentially have three different options for your graphics API renderer. You have OpenGL, you have Vulkan, and you have NVN, which is the NVIDIA kind of proprietary NVIDIA graphics API that was built for the Nintendo Switch. OpenGL is probably the easiest to learn, but it's also the slowest as far as performance. Vulkan kind of sits in the middle. It's harder to learn than OpenGL, but it does give you a significant boost in performance. And then NVN gives you the absolute fastest performance, but there is also a learning curve associated with NVN. So I can only assume that the developers were comfortable using Vulkan, or maybe due to some portability, they were building this emulator on a PC for start, running Vulkan, and then ported all that code over to the Switch, which means that the API could easily just work without too many changes that were done. I think that's ultimately the way they went. NVN is something that is proprietary to the Switch, so I think those types of decisions were made, pretty early on in this project. But on to Mario Sunshine, it absolutely is running a Nintendo GameCube emulator, And there is evidence to suggest, if you look at this screenshot, that here is the actual ROM file that's being used for the emulator itself. The extension .gcm is probably very familiar to people that have been in and around GameCube emulation in the past. It's just an ISO file, guys. And look, at the end of the day, it doesn't seem to be doing the on-the-fly patching that Mario 64 was doing on the Nintendo 64 game in Mario 3D All-Stars, and this one is a little more set in stone, but you will notice that the game runs in 16:9 widescreen. But other than that, it's it's referencing kind of the GameCube button assets and things that we've already seen before. So this one, again, is interesting that they're going the emulation option. Now, Super Mario Galaxy is the third game in the All-Stars 3D All-Stars collection that's also running emulation, but there is some discussion going on, and I haven't seen this myself, or I'm not sure if this has been confirmed yet, but there is some talk that it's more of a hybrid approach where some of the code has been ported, but the graphics renderer and the audio rendering is emulation. So this is a little more interesting to me, that it's running some type of hybrid emulation / porting approach. But I think this one needs to be more fleshed out. And when I pick up the game on Friday, I'll definitely get into that a little more and see what's going on there. Now, guys, I want to be clear that I love emulation, and I'm not unhappy about the direction that was taken here. In some ways, emulating the game makes a lot more sense, because it makes it true to the original. If emulated correctly, it will be, a great experience. But look, at the end of the day, it's clear that this project did not have a very big budget or a very big team working on it, but it did have seemingly a team of very experienced emulation developers that knows what's going on. But, my biggest issue here is that they've really done the bare minimum here. There are many features that we kind of expect with a 3D All-Stars collection that are just lacking, and I think ultimately that's the biggest disappointment that I have. Now, it is true that Nintendo owns the source code for all three of these games: Mario 64, Mario Galaxy, and Mario Sunshine. So why wouldn't they go down the road of just porting code? I think in general it's probably because of time and budget constraints. Just because you have the source code, the porting process can still be very, very complicated and maybe end up costing you more time and money than you anticipated. I think with a solid team of developers that know emulation very well, it's easier to build a schedule of deliverables and timelines to hit. And I think ultimately that's the way that they kind of took on this project, that if we're using emulation, and maybe they already had emulation built in-house already for this project, I think ultimately that's the way that they decided to go. And look, I have no issue with it. I just feel like there should have been more that was added to this collection. I've been saying that pretty much since this game was first announced, that it's definitely lacking in some features. But I am, from a technical perspective, I am quite impressed with some of the things that they've done, and I'm definitely interested to see how this game performs when it comes out on Friday. So now that we've all but confirmed that no ports exist, this is all emulation, what does that mean for Nintendo Switch Online? Is it possible for Nintendo 64 games, GameCube games to run on Nintendo Switch Online? Well, yes, absolutely. Now that it's confirmed that Nintendo has these emulators, they could potentially go down this path of giving those pieces, to the public. So we'll just have to wait and see if it's something Nintendo is interested in doing, maybe in the next year or so. But I'm kind of excited to see where this goes. And look, I want to see what happens as far as, the modding scene. I've already seen some people talking about injecting different ROMs into the emulator to see what happens. So there's a lot more information that's coming, and I'll definitely be on top of it for you guys. And when the game comes out on Friday, I'll do more of a deep dive technical analysis and, just compare the different games and show you what's going on there as well. But guys, I hope you liked this video and this information. Let me know your thoughts about Super Mario 3D All-Stars on the Nintendo Switch. Now that it's running emulation, has it changed your mind about the game? Do you care whether it's emulation or ports? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Well guys, I will leave it here for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, you know what to do. Leave me a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.